This is FaithWorks Live. Rebecca Haynie is my name, and I'm always privileged to be able to spend this little slice of eternity with you, looking at how we live out our faith in the here and now. If God's put us here for just such a time as this, which I believe, and that's been our focus this year, how then shall we live? What does it mean to live out our faith in the middle of, again, some crazy, chaotic circumstances? Sometimes there's so much that's going on in this world that we look at and we think, oh Lord, I'm glad you're in control, because I do not have the answers. And we are, we've been praying for our brothers and sisters in Ukraine and that situation now for the last several weeks. You've heard, the outcry of these poor people in a war zone. And it feels like we're so far away. What do we do? What's the right thing to do? Geopolitically, there are all of these answers that are being promulgated, or theories about, how do we fix this? How do we solve this? How do we address this? And yet I think this is an opportunity for the people of God to shine in unique ways. And I am so privileged to be joined by people with firsthand love of the Ukrainian people, experience there, and knowledge of how God is working in Ukraine and in his church there. Andrew and Katie Green are my guests today, and they have planted churches in Ukraine. They have many friends currently in Ukraine, and they join us to share their perspective and some of what they're here, some testimonies of God moving in powerful ways this hour. It's going to be great. Andrew and Katie, thanks for joining me.
All right, it's great to be with you.
So how did you guys, you are happily married, awesome couple. And how did you end up connecting from Midwest America to the country of Ukraine?
That happened in stages. I went on a mission trip in 1998 to Minsk, Belarus. And then later on, the guy, his name was Stuart Merrill, and he was, actually, technically, I went on a mission trip with his brother. Stuart was the preacher in Minsk, and he ended up getting us set up in the country of Ukraine, which is just south of there. So, and that was in 2004.
And Katie, how did you enter into the picture too?
Well, I grew up on the mission field in Taiwan, and so Stuart was already aware of the fact that I had an interest in missions, and so Andrew was interested in missions, and so that's how we connected. And so Stuart met up with us. He decided to ask if we were interested in starting a work in Ukraine.
Did that bring you two together?
No. I went to college in Iowa, interestingly enough, in Ottumwa with her brother.
Well, I think we had a mutual interest in missions, though.
Yeah.
See, I want to get it straight for the Hallmark movie. I just need to know.
Yeah. We need a dog.
This works together. Yes, of course. So, how long were you ministering in Ukraine?
11 years. 11 years. And there was a dog. We brought our dog over with us. So
she was an American dog.
Yes.
Was there a language barrier for the dog?
Yes.
There was.
She didn't speak Russian.
Oh,
so
no.
She didn't know. So when we would leave her at the pound there, it took a while before she could learn Russian and knew Russian commands and stuff like that. Yeah.
So if you're looking at, just to help us paint a picture of what life was like for you there, you mentioned Nikopol. What is that city like?
It's a large village of 140,000 people.
It's like 4 stops.
That is quite large.
I know that it sounds crazy, but it's not. It's it feels rural because it's so packed together, and the town is only like maybe 2 or 3 miles across. So it has an easygoing feel. It's not like an American city of 140,000 has a huge metro area. They don't, they just have little farms on the outside. So so it feels like a 20 or 30,000 population town when you're sitting in it.
Wow, I can imagine that. So it's somewhat different than life if you're in a typical Midwestern town.
Mhm. Yeah.
I suppose, yeah. It's like a small Midwestern town with big cement buildings.
Well, fair enough. So what was life like there for you while you were living there? Some things that may be the same, but maybe different.
Hmm.
Well, we raised 4 kids while there. So I had our 4th one while we were staying there. I had him in the hospital. Um, there was, it was lots of bumps in the road for sure, because our kids were American and all their friends are Ukrainian. So there was certainly kind of a, you have the kids that are bullies to our kids, or the kids that kind of like to schmooze with the Americans and try to, see if they can get to America somehow.
So was that something that, culturally, I can imagine there's some distinctions there, but that's a large part of your family's life,
Mhm.
for over a decade. So I would imagine that was pretty formative for the kiddos too, in growing
Yes.
up with working with the church in Ukraine.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. Well,
what were some
our,
of your big memories there?
Hmm.
oh,
We got a couple.
stray dogs.
Yeah.
The stories
Yes.
of stray dogs.
Yeah,
like-
the stray dogs over there. There's so many memorable things. As far as relating to there's cultural things like going over to dinner, and in America we're used to cleaning your plate. That's polite. But so we went over to someone's dinner, and we'd finish whatever she had prepared for us, and she'd come back with a plate of food more. I was like, wow,
Oh,
and so this kept on happening, and I'm trying to be
we
polite.
keep clearing our
I'm
plate
stuffed.
because
I'm
we were
stuffed.
taught
So she
to
goes
clear.
into the kitchen, and she's starting to make more food, like just like out of the fridge stuff. And I'm like, what's going on? So we come to find out their culture over there, you don't, whenever you're full, you leave one thing on the plate. And that's
oh.
so I don't know for how many years we were really being rude and eating people's out of house and
Oh
home,
no.
thinking we're being polite. So that we had a good laugh once we figured that out, and so, but I mean, they were good friends, so they were good about it. But so things like that. I think the most memorable, obviously, is our oldest son was baptized over there.
Mm.
So that was cool. And maybe some of the VBSs, that was a new thing over there when we did those, and
Mhm.
so doing some of those. And
There was one lady I remember came to a VBS, and she thought that we had some kind of a underhanded motive for having all these kids come to the church. She thought we were
oh yeah,
vampires and we were going to suck the children's
yeah,
blood.
Oh, wow.
yeah, that's she's a weird, they're a little superstitious.
A tad bit. Yeah.
Yeah, some of them, not all of them.
Well, and you proved that you were not in fact vampires,
Yes,
and that you really
yes,
just
we were
did care
not-
about the
we were
kids.
not interested.
Yeah.
To be fair, there were a lot of Russian people, or Ukrainian people, excuse me, that thought that was a bizarre lady.
Mm.
So it was not just us.
Well, we have those in America too.
Yeah.
For sure. Yes, God bless her. So since you mentioned working with the church, let's talk a little bit about that and some of your experiences there, and what's going on there in
Sure.
Nikopol right now.
The church, the preacher there has 2 rehabilitation centers, and a men's and a women's. And for alcoholics, alcohol over there is an epidemic problem. And so he is actually a recovered drug abuser himself.
Yeah.
And he's set up 2, so we have continued to support those, and he's now had over 2,000 people that have been through his rehabilitation
Yeah, they've been
program.
in different locations. And when we say 2 rehab centers, one's a men's, one's a women's. And I believe they're opening up a third.
Well, they were. That was planned.
Well,
before the
obviously,
war.
right, before the war, they were planning on opening up a third. So that's on hold for right now, so.
And is that, I mean, there's so many questions that we could ask, and I know there's particular focus on Ukraine right now because of what's happening.
Sure.
But what I've been really impressed by, just seeing reports, and of course I'm much farther away from the situation, so I want to get your take on it, is being very impressed by the stalwart faith of the Ukrainian people and the folks that are saying, yes, we're going to stay here. We're going to serve in the midst of this, which is, something I've never had to imagine, or I've never had to face that choice in my life. Are you hearing some similar things about that? And how are people in the churches that you are in contact with, how are they holding up right now?
Well, again, that's different based on where you're located, but
Sure.
I mean, but everyone, no matter, I mean, like Nikopol hasn't had a lot go on there until
just a half hour ago.
Well, a little bit more than that. About around 2:00 or 3:00, I got a call from Slavic that there was an explosion about 2 miles outside of town. So we don't know what it was. I can't confirm that or anything like that. So, but I've been to the village. It's just an ever so small village where he said that occurred at. And I mean, there's nothing that explodes there. I mean, it's a village. I mean, they get there.
We're suspecting it was.
So, I mean, I don't want to suspect anything or report anything. So,
sure.
It's just, there's, that's how rumors get started, and, you don't want that to take off. So, but he said there was an explosion and there was visible fire. So it could be any number of things, but it certainly doesn't sound good. I mean, we lived there for 11 years. There was never an explosion in Alexeyevka.
Yeah.
So,
And we were there in 2014,
Yeah.
the last time that there was an invasion in Ukraine, and they never touched Nikopol.
yeah, no,
where
I
we
mean,
were.
they didn't even come close. They were mostly eastern Ukraine and southern. So, but as far as the people go, it's still bravery. Now, some of the ladies have left. Now, men can't leave. But even still, to see situations where men are taking their vehicles back and forth between Kiev and the border, and and not just staying there, and driving loading up their cars with medicine and food and driving back in, picking up people, and they just make this run. People going west and supplies go east, and all the time, and it's like, it's amazing. Their faith. And
I heard a testimony from one driver he quoted from the book of Esther. Maybe we were here for such a point as this.
Yeah, you let off with that, and I think that's kind of the feeling for a lot of people.
This is a hard moment. And again, I can't imagine being there, but seeing the examples, just even long distance as I have. And if people are interested in more of these examples and testimony, we're going to get into that during the course of this hour. Very excited to share stories from Katie and Andrew Green, who are, know firsthand the people and the church in Ukraine, and just because, like, whatever the gates of hell can throw at the church, it still not prevail. And so we're seeing the stalwart. I love the term stalwart, or the perseverance of the Christians in Ukraine. And I'd love to get into that. I know there's also a lot of conflicting understandings, or people don't really understand some of the background that has led to the war, or the the actions that we're seeing Russia take against Ukraine. So I think that might be helpful to get a little bit of that perspective too from where you sit. If that'd be all right, when we return, you're listening to FaithWorks Live. Now is the time to stand for life. For 50 years, Iowans for Life has been the longest standing nonprofit pro-life organization in Iowa, and they stand strong today as Pulse Life advocates. They believe in defending the defenseless. And that's what we need now, a new generation to value the sanctity of all human life from fertilization till natural death. They advocate at the Capitol, in classrooms, at events across the state of Iowa on abortion, on family planning, on physician-assisted suicide, euthanasia, basically every issue where the culture is so contrary to what God calls us to. They're standing in the gap as defenders of the defenseless, and they're a voice for the voiceless because they believe in the value of life. And if you do too, sign up for their newsletter and get involved today at pulseforlife.org. That's pulseforlife.org. At FaithWorks Live, we're proud to partner with InnerVisions Healthcare. In unplanned pregnancy and STD situations, they offer help and hope. It's all confidential and it's all free. If women are in a crisis pregnancy situation, they know that they can get real help at InnerVisions. Free pregnancy testing, free STD testing, free ultrasounds as well to see that inner vision. Because women deserve the truth about their bodies, about their baby, about all of their options. And if a woman has gone down the road of seeking abortion through medication and she regrets that decision, InnerVisions also offers abortion pill reversal procedure, which is a life-saving, miraculous option to have right here in our own community. InnerVisions Healthcare, well worth supporting, providing those free services to women in crisis pregnancy. You can call them 24 hours a day at 515-440-2273. That's 515-440-2273. So glad you're listening to FaithWorks Live. Very special guests this hour, Katie and Andrew Green. If you're following along so far, if you haven't heard from the beginning, you're going to need to go back to the podcast. But summary, Katie and Andrew have a heart for Ukraine. They lived there for 11 years, planting churches and working in the mission field there, and still very much they're back in the States now, but still very much in contact with people in Ukraine, with Christians there. And obviously, this is a time of great trial in the lives of Ukrainians and the Ukrainian people. But I don't know that we as Americans have an awful lot of background as to what's causing this. Why would Russia be taking some of these actions? And I just wondered if you could give us kind of a thumbnail sketch to help us, the average listener, understand where this is coming from.
Yeah, this goes back centuries. I'm probably more than I do like history, but I'm sure it goes back further than I know. These people consider themselves really cousins, if you think of it that way. They're all related in that respect. So if you go back to a century ago, there's things called the Golod, or the forced famines, where Stalin tried to compel them to submit and get rid of their Ukrainian nationalism. He tried to breed that out of them.
You see the nationalism.
The Ukrainian people are very independent people, and they've not liked the idea of Russia looking over their shoulder and forcing them. So he tried to get that out of them. They outlawed the Ukrainian language, so a lot of Ukrainians don't speak Ukrainian, and then just all things. But the forced famines killed millions of people just in I think it's 1 year from 1934 to 1935, or somewhere right in that area. They killed 3 million people. When you put that in Ukraine, and there were other countries involved in that. When you put that into perspective of other things that happened in Germany, we know those numbers every day. But
right.
So there's that history. Then you come up to modern time. We moved over in 2004, and the guy who was backed by Russia in the election of that year had poisoned the other guy, and then Russia got in on that election, and so they had to have another election. So there was a thing called the Orange Revolution, and then the international community stepped in and said, no, you're not going to cheat in an election, which is, ever so ironic now. But,
Right.
and then that guy, the guy that they redid the vote. So the guy that really should have won, and he was not the guy that Russia wanted. Well, the guy Russia wanted ended up winning a vote later in a legitimate election. But because of his corruption, Ukraine stormed the castle and forced him to flee Ukraine. And that was right after that Russia invaded in 2014. So there is, I'm only scratching the surface of the things that have gone on between these two. In terms of geopolitics, plays a big part of this. So up until 2014, Russia didn't really have a lot of ports. They had over by Alaska, but that's a lot of shipping, from Moscow. So the other place was to take their ships up over, the North Sea, up over England, which is almost to the North Pole. They had almost nothing on the Black Sea. And so Crimea makes a nice port place for them to get. And so if you've read about, everybody's heard of Mariupol, the city that they're leveling. That's right on the coast, southeast, about 2 hours from where we used to live in Nikopol. And they really need that. That connects Russia down to Crimea. And that's what I think that's one of the main things that they want, is those port cities in Odessa as well. So,
well, and I've been, reading a bit, as I think most Americans have, about what could be motivating Putin. I think that that definitely makes a lot of sense in terms of strategic areas,
Sure.
resources. And then there's the cultural aspect that you mentioned, where he seems to be making this argument that, this is historically, these are all supposed to be part of Russia. And so there's this kind of cultural cry to restoration of that identity. And it would seem that as hard as the Ukrainian people are fighting for their country and their nation, I think that would be pretty hard for the average Russian to believe that they're on board with being subsumed. I mean, that's just my view from the cheap seats.
Yeah, well, the genetically Russian people are actually closely related to Polish people. And the Ukrainian language actually bears more of a similarity to Polish. But
so you mentioned
Vladimir Putin has never let facts stand in his way. So,
well, they can be stubborn things, can't they? They get in the way of those political ambitions every time.
Accusing a Jew of being a Nazi is kind of,
Yeah, that's awkward. That's that's awkward and not borne out by the facts. So when we look at and I feel hampered by the fact that we have all of this information that is coming at us now. So I'm speaking as an American, caring about the situation, but not really knowing what to believe and what's true.
Sure.
And there's an awful lot of information out there. People say, well, are these photos real, for example? What reports can we believe? Because we've got, reports from different sides that are going to try to present the case that they want the world to know.
Right.
So what are some things that we should know as Americans when we're watching this conflict unfold?
I really stay out of the anything mainstream, because like you said, it's not just for political reasons, and I don't want to get into mainstream media criticisms or anything like that. It's not my focus as a minister and as a person. I'm a minister of a congregation here in America, and then I'm still working with churches over there. I don't really have time to try to sort out who's telling me what. So I can tell you, to go on, our Facebook page, and I post pictures every once in a while. These are photos, these are cell phone camera photos of people we know. A Bible Institute that's been bombed out, a church in Kiev that we know, that I know the man who started it, where 10 people have been killed. 5 of those are children. That's not media, or that's not politics, or this government or that
That's
government.
what we're seeing with our own eyes, so to speak.
Yeah.
And having seen some of those photos, and if people are interested to, which of course, why wouldn't you be, go to Nikopol Evangelism's Facebook page. I will post the link and connect it on our podcast as well. But Nikopol is Nikopol Evangelism. And that way you can connect and see exactly what Andrew and Katie are talking about. There are also places to give, to help. That's one of the questions that I get the most often is, well, what can we do to help? And Americans, we really want to send money. We want to send resources, but it can be difficult, of course,
Sure.
in a war zone to be able to figure out how to be most effective. So there are some ways to give as well at that same page, correct?
Mhm.
Yes. And there are others other than that. I just don't have room to post everything. And
Yeah.
that's the one thing that's been encouraging is, and I had someone ask me, who's the group supporting or this, this church over there? And I'm like, right now my head is so full of contacts. I cannot tell you off the top of my head because everybody has jumped in. Churches all over have jumped in. I have been, half of my time is, clicking accept friend requests.
Sure.
Because I'm meeting people all over the world that are interested, obviously, in the story and want to know what to do. And
Mhm.
there's just so many churches. There's churches in Amarillo, Texas, doing things, and in Searcy, Arkansas, where my son goes to college. There's just churches all over the place doing things, and through that Facebook page you mentioned, you can get a hold of me and I can, point people to different directions. What do you want to give to? I had a conversation today with a guy in the church where I grew up at. And I said, he's like, so who do we send money to? I was like, well, I said, what do you want to send money to?
Hmm.
There's
Refugee camps.
refugee camps in Europe where
Yeah.
the women have gotten across. There's refugee camps
that are in Ukraine.
in Ukraine, yep,
Mhm.
where the men haven't been able to get across, and some women have decided to stay with their husbands because they're like, I'd rather die in Ukraine with my husband than be free and single. So they've made that, and then there's people making the runs back and forth, and that we're still working with people down in Nikopol, and here's people that can't, they can't get on those trains. Those trains, I don't know if you've heard stories of what it's like to be on a train, but a trip that used to be 12 hours, you go and you wait in the freezing cold, and you could be
35
waiting for a
hours now.
day to get on a train until there's free space. Then you get in, then they have a sleeping car that has 4 beds in it, and that's with 6 people as a 6-person family. We were tight when we would go on those overnight. They got 20 people in those cars, so you don't get out.
You don't give up your spot.
You don't give up your spot.
Once you get on the train, you don't get off.
Yeah, you hold it.
And these are 35 hours.
For 35 hours, you don't
Wow.
eat. It's like, it's crazy just to get to the border.
And that's on
So
the
so
train.
there's people that simply don't have the physical capability to do that.
Mhm.
So they still need food. They still need medicine and things. So we, there's different things to support. And so people can get a hold of me, and I can point them in the type of direction, that they want to give in. And there's any number of things. So, and I want to clarify, when we say refugee centers, a lot of people are going to think of, like some big UNICEF compound with chain link fence or something like that.
Mhm.
These are not those. Those have tons of funding. What we're talking about is churches that have, taken their auditorium and built 2x4 beds, and have 60 people. And then on top of that, they're supplying individuals in their church who have taken 1 or 2 in, here or there. So that's what refugee looks like in some of those Ukrainian cities and Polish cities and Romania cities.
Looks like the church being the church. Is what that
Yes,
sounds like.
that's exactly right. That's exactly right.
Mhm.
Andrew and Katie Green are my guests. We're going to take a little bit of a break, but I know that you're as fascinated as I am listening to what's going on in Ukraine from the perspective of of our brothers and sisters, how we can help. You just heard them mention this page, Nikopol Evangelism, and that's Nikopol Evangelism. So get connected with them there. I'm sorry, Andrew and Katie, I did send you a random friend request, so you can ignore that for more important people for now. So it's not one more on your list. But I think it's so compelling to hear how God's people are serving and shining, even in the midst of an incredibly dark time, crazy, chaotic, violent time, unfortunately, that this is, in spite of the darkness, that God's people can shine like stars. And it certainly sounds like that's what's happening for the church. I'd like to get into it a little bit more on the other side of what life is like for Christians in Ukraine, and some of the stories that you've heard that are basically God at work, unquestionably God at work in Ukraine, even in a war zone. And that's how good he is. He does that. You're listening to FaithWorks Live.
When you love people, you cook them tasty food. And there is no tastier food for my money and for my family than Anonymous beef. And they are so good at what they do. It's naturally raised beef. And in fact, there's several opportunities. You've had to be on a wait list because of how good and how popular their products are. Well, now there's new opportunity right now. Act now to get your Anonymous beef. There's no steroids or antibiotics. It is all natural, farm-raised butcher beef. And you can pay processing at the locker fees. They help walk you through all of the process. It's a little bit different than going to the grocery store, but it is well worth it. You get great value for your money, and they help walk first-time customers through the whole process. Now is the perfect time to provide great quality food for your family, and it just doesn't get better than Anonymous beef. So go to their website and start looking at your order today, whether it's half a cow or freezer full, whatever you need to fit your family, they'll help you out. It's anonymousbeef.com. That's OHNEMUS beef.com. What does love look like? Love means serving those who are truly in need, and that is what they do at Agape Pregnancy Resource Center. That's really what they're all about, helping, loving, serving women in crisis pregnancy situations with free pregnancy testing, STD testing, ultrasounds, and so much more. For practical needs, they have turned whole lives and whole family trees. It's amazing to see what they're doing right here in our very own community for women in need. They provide free services because they believe that women deserve the truth about their bodies and about their babies. And when women know they're not alone, they can fix the crisis and carry them through the pregnancy. They empower women to choose life. And like I said, whole families are here because of the work that they do at Agape. There are many ways to get involved, practical ways for you to live out your pro-life through Agape. Get involved with their important ministry at agapedsm.com. Click the tab that says Get Involved and find out their current needs and ways that you can help meet those needs and care for women in crisis and save babies at the same time. It's agapedsm.com.
So glad you're with us. This is FaithWorks Live. And how do we live out our faith right here, right now, where God has placed us? There's an awful lot going on in the world. Our eyes and hearts have been turned toward the nation of Ukraine that's found itself under a Russian attack now for several weeks now. And we're not exactly sure what the end will look like. And hopefully we pray for peace, obviously, but even in the midst of this terrible conflict, we see God at work. And Andrew and Katie Green are my gracious guests today. They have lived in Ukraine for over a decade of their lives. They spent on the mission fields planting churches, and they're very connected with with several of the churches in Ukraine and in that area of the world as well. And I just so appreciate the firsthand perspective and the accounts of the brothers and sisters there that are just basically continuing to live and to serve their mission for Christ. And that is not an easy thing to do when literally your churches are being bombed or attacked. And that's some of what we've seen as well, haven't we?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
What does worship look like in Ukraine right now? What is that?
Well, it's obviously smaller. In terms of the congregations, you have a lot of people that have left a congregation. So it's a lot more men, that men might have stayed behind, and they might have some elderly women, but they haven't stopped meeting. Even in places that are being bombed, they're still meeting,
Together in person.
Yeah.
Mm.
Yeah. So
That sounds pretty convicting. I know
Yeah,
there are
I
still
know.
churches today in America that don't feel safe to do that for other reasons.
yes, yeah,
It's humbling,
yeah.
just to see them, and they're so determined, and they're just so determined to be out there and visible for people to see that, hey, the church is still here, the church is still alive.
Mm-hmm.
Well, and
Yeah.
it's a time when I would imagine it's hard for me to even say the words I could imagine this, because I've never been in
Right.
any situation even close to this.
Right.
But when you are most, in fear, under attack, threatened, when all of these trials become so real in your life, that's the time when you most need the church. And so
Yes.
from the American perspective, there's just so much that I'm learning. And like you said, Katie, it's humbling to see people whose homes are under attack, their families have been divided, and they are committed to worshiping Christ and serving him, even in the midst of all of that destruction and danger. And I mean, we tend to worry about how much snow we've got and see, well, I'm not really sure I want to get out of bed and make it all the way to Sunday morning service.
Yeah, you're right.
Mhm.
So
You're
that's,
right.
we've just got so much to learn.
Yeah, and I think when you have that taken away from you, you start to go, what is really important. We, like you said, you can't even imagine. I lived over there. I can't imagine, things that, places I've been that,
Yeah, we're seeing in the pictures places where we've been that are now bombed, and it's just it's
Yeah.
just
It's
tragic.
like, I can't believe that's happening there,
Mhm.
But,
Well, and knowing that the church is out there responding and helping in ways that
Right.
that only we can, and the people that are closest to that situation, right? If you wouldn't mind describing some of those ways that the church is being the hands and feet of Christ. You've been talking about that a little bit more, but I just want to let you
Sure.
run with it.
So Katie's jumping. You want to
did
say
I jump
something?
ship?
Yeah, no. You're chomping at the bit. She's actually, she's been, Katie posts a blog, and so she's quicker sometimes to post stuff than I am, and I'm supposed to be doing the Nikopol page. But
Slavi
this,
tends to text me.
yeah,
before
for
he
some
texts
reason
you.
our preacher texts her, not me. So first, so why don't you take it?
All right. Well, there has been, when we left the Ukraine, we were pretty well focused on the congregation in Nikopol. And since we left and this war started, we started to contact a lot of people over there, and we started to discover all of the churches and the places and the work that's being done. So there's been actually a lot that I wasn't aware of myself. And there's quite a few preachers that, like we said, couldn't leave. And so I think that when the pressure was on, they just decided to step up and really be heroes. They recognized that there was a real need for the medicine, the food, there's so many little ladies, that we've been in contact with that need medication. There so many Ukrainians have a very big problem with blood pressure, just as an example. And a lot of these little ladies in their houses that are stuck, under a lot of stress, they're really at very high risk for stroke. And so these younger men have every time they hear about someone that is, is kind of holed up in their house and doesn't have any access to medication, we can call them, we can tell them, hey, there's somebody in this place, in this house, this address, and they'll and getting medicine to them and getting drinking water for them, because so many people here in the States have been kind of tone deaf and telling us, hey, just tell them to drink water, tell them to eat a lot of
we had
avocados.
someone eat a lot of avocados. I'm like, I'm sure they'll just run out to the avocado store that's been bombed, and get those. It's You know,
Right.
are you kidding me?
So,
They can't
So
even find ready access to food at this point
right.
in a lot of
So
areas.
I mean,
Right.
in Mariupol, which is right on the water, they're drinking tea made with salt water, which is not a sustainable. That's not a solution.
they're just glad to have
They're
something
trying to
drink.
have something to drink, and um, it, it's amazing, what things are being done over there. Even in the safer places, everybody chipping in. It's kids. They're doing what they can. So they're, because of the massive amount of people that have come to the western side to be close to Europe, hoping that Putin won't bomb that close. Those cities are getting overrun.
Mhm.
So their stores are getting overrun. So they have limits on what you can buy. So they're taking little kids, they're taking teenagers, and everybody can buy like 1 or 2 bags of pasta or rice or something, and that's what so they have a whole church go in individually, and they buy their bag of rice, and they're doing this and assembling and then packing these up for a guy. He's one of many, but the guy that I know is a guy by the name of Taras, and Taras loads them into his van, and that's the guy that he brings them out, and then he loads up his van and goes back in, and it's just, there's so many people like this.
We should
Um,
mention too, Adi Bauchi from Romania. He
Oh,
loads
yeah.
up his car with groceries from Romania and brings them in. He picks up refugees from the border of Ukraine, and I just saw him yesterday. He said that he had 7 passengers in a 5-passenger car, and one of them had to ride in the trunk. Because
One of
for a
them
3.5-hour trip.
in the trunk
Mhm.
for
So
3 hours. What they'll do is, it's amazing, but yeah, they are a hardy people.
we weren't quite aware of how stubborn Ukrainian people
No,
are.
I
until
no,
this
I
happened.
was, but I they're I mean, they're hardworking people, and they're impressive in so many ways.
And I think that's something that Americans are instinctively identifying with. I sort of threw out there that most of us didn't have a whole lot of background on the Ukraine-Russia conflict. Like, where would this be coming from? This unprovoked attack, and yet, because we can identify with that spirit that loves independence, that is not just going to go quietly into that good
Right.
night, but they're willing to stay and fight for their homeland. I mean, that's something that I think resonates with the American heart for sure. But there's also a spirit that, specifically looking at the church, that's looking to serve the vulnerable, and say, we will remain strong. And so that's what I love about what you're bringing out, because I mean, we haven't talked an awful lot about how terrifying this would be, but meeting again in person in your churches, or meeting in your homes, and knowing that these bombs have not been very well targeted, shall we say. These are not just things that are, the targets are not just military significance,
No,
right? I mean,
no,
we're seeing pictures of hospitals and homes, and
no.
it really doesn't feel like any place is safe from attack.
Yeah, no. One guy said, there's places where there's a hole in 2 sides of the house. It's like a missile went through it, and and you've got to try to live in your home with 2 holes in it. So it's
They're starting to take aim at unarmed civilians. I
well,
think that,
I wouldn't say starting to, they've been doing that
Yeah.
since the beginning.
Yeah.
So
I think that the Russian army has lost so many soldiers, that I think that they're just starting to almost just break down the morale of the Ukrainian military.
or people. I mean, I don't know what their attempts or
No.
I really don't know. I mean, I try not to. That's not my concerns. Like I say, it's not my concern what their strategies are. just
Mhm.
whatever the strategy is. You know, you pray that they fail. I pray that, you know, it's like the one story in the Old Testament where, you know, they pray for his advisors to give him bad advice, you know, and that's what I think.
Yep.
Like, please God, give him bad advisors. So,
Yeah.
um,
I think that's been a struggle as to how to pray specifically for the Ukrainian people, but also for
yeah,
the Russians in the conflict too,
Mm.
because
yeah,
we know that there are people that have to be conflicted about the
yeah,
orders that they're being given and
yes,
about the motivation for all this too.
yeah, yeah. I mean, so many of them are from one country and have relatives in another, or have moved to another country, and you know, it's like I said, this is they have such a soft. They have historically had a soft border for those citizens of those countries. They just go back and forth across. You know, kind of like we would, even easier than we would go across the Canadian border.
Mm.
So you know, I'm going to go up to Moscow for a job, or I'm going to go down to Kiev for a job, and so these are people that they've married somebody from the other country, and the people themselves, I think, are very. I don't even think they're conflicted. I don't think the majority of people from Moscow are in favor of this. I think that you've seen, you know, demonstrations and things like that, and fairly vocal people.
Mm.
So there's just a few, you know, one in particular. So
Well, and that's an area for sure where we can concentrate prayers. And I
right,
know that that's, again, foremost on people's minds. What can I do to help? And praying has got to be top of any list.
yes,
Absolutely. We should never treat it as a last resort. It should always be
no,
first.
and that's a good point, and that's been actually the first thing that they've requested before they request money. They request prayers, and they said first pray, then give,
Mhm.
and you know, so
I was talking with a preacher in rehabilitation, or sorry, no, refugee camp that's in Chernovtsi, and what he asked for was that Putin would have a change of heart, which I thought was really profound. You know, he's asking for prayer for the leader of the opposing country that is right now devastating his own, and I just thought that was so incredible.
yeah,
Mhm.
yeah,
That's wise. It seems so supernatural, right? It's so
yeah,
outside of what we would normally do, what we would normally say to and about our
yeah,
enemies.
Mhm.
And yet, if we can pray for our enemies, for those who are actively persecuting us, that's exactly what Jesus calls us to do. It's a lot easier said than done sometimes, but it
Mhm.
certainly sounds like the church is having quite an impact in terms of meeting the physical needs there of the moment, but also spiritual needs. There's some real evangelism that's taking place.
yes, yes. We've been. It's like every day. Here's this person, they want to become Christians, or
I don't know. We've lost count how many
oh
have
yeah,
been baptized since the.
I don't know. I don't even. I don't. It's like you say. I don't even keep count. And they come in from all over. Some of them in the refugee centers. Some of them still in Kiev. Some of them in Nikopol. We've seen, you know, people that haven't come in a long time, that have returned. One family that we studied with, they never became Christians. So we left in 2015. And they seemed, you know, mostly interested in, you know, something financial that we could do for them then. Maybe that's still the case, I don't know, but all of a sudden they're back in church.
Hmm.
Again, it could be financial, but it's like, hey, that's, you know, that's Lilia, and her son's a lot taller. So uh, and but it's neat to see those things, and it's like other people are coming back, and there's a family of 6 and they're all going to be baptized or something. It's like
Wow.
there's so much, there's so much that's going on. And it goes back to what we talked about, I think, like in the first segment, is, you know, that people are being aware of what's really important, you know.
And I know that as we're reassessing our own priorities here, I think in light of this is one of the things that we're hopefully the lessons that the American church can learn
Yeah.
from the church in Ukraine is, we should not let anything keep us from our mission.
Right.
We really can't. And yes, there are some very real fears and very real dangers that take place. And tomorrow is not promised to any of
No.
us.
No, you're right.
But to be able to see people in the middle of that going about with courage, and maybe that's it. It's the courage that I think we can learn an awful lot from, and the focus that God is going to sustain us and God is going to be our strength in the midst of a time that would overwhelm us normally.
Yeah.
And that's, I don't know, I'm humbled by that realization, and anything that I can do in terms of helping, I'm interested in that. So you mentioned a few different obviously prayer and supporting, lifting up our brothers and sisters in the Ukraine in prayer, and places to give. You mentioned that it can be a little difficult to actually get resources in there because of some of the crackdowns in the financial system right now too.
Yeah, so that's been kind of a fluid situation. One day, so the way we've typically gotten money to them has been through a fund that I run. It's a 501c3. It's tax deductible deductions or contributions, and so that's gone fine right up until the war started, and then all of a sudden American bank cards, which the preacher uses over there, don't work. So all of a sudden an American card has no access. So I have a large sum of money that we use to support the rehab facilities over there that we use to facilitate the church's needs and things like that, and it's completely unusable. So then the only way we can get money to Slavic to buy groceries is to put money on his personal card, which presents some problems. So then Western Union was charging their standard 8%. I don't think that looked too good for them, and people
Wow.
have stopped using them immediately. And it was like really tone deaf, kind of a thing. Like, they're in a war and you're going to charge people 8% to get funds to them. So they've since dropped that to zero. But in the meantime, there were other apps that were already in existence, but suddenly sprang to they were lower. And so we've been able to, well, one day this one's working, one day this not working. And so Western Union, now that they're down to 0% for things going to Ukraine, have been it's been the best, most consistent. So we send through there, but you obviously you have to know the person's account information, so
Sure.
we don't hand that out.
Right.
So we go to one location and we have a person that sends that to the various locations. So.
And they can use those as resources to get supplies, basics,
right. Yeah. So
medication.
It's just you're throwing money into their bank account and they're taking it out. So.
Yeah, I know that they have to be facing so much in terms of the psychological toll of all of this. I know that you mentioned the PTSD that the people would be going through, and I mean that's got to be incredibly real. And
yeah, we're trying to find somebody, because that's one of the things that I think gets lost in this, is that they're in a war and they might not be soldiers, but they're going through a lot of the same things emotionally that soldiers would go through. And I have a good friend that he was a psychologist in Afghanistan, and his job was to do that for soldiers, to keep them mentally healthy, right up until a bomb hit the place where he was stationed at. He was fine, no one was injured. But all of a sudden he had to come home because now he's suffering with PTSD. And the guy I was talking to today was his brother, and said, just like a month ago, it's the first time he's opened up about that since, and that's years since he's come back. So, they're going to be, some of them have seen awful things. All of them have experienced, their entire life is insecure now. You have this default thing where you get up and it's sunny outside and you go outside and you expect to get in and everything just goes perfect, or relatively close to perfect. I mean, a bad day is, you get stuck on a train and you miss, something, and so now all of a sudden your buildings are bombed, your life is threatened. And there, one girl was talking, that was Nastia, right? Shenya's wife, talking about what it's like. She's talking about not dreaming, so she's not getting into deep sleep. And I'm like, she's not getting REM sleep, she's got PTSD. And so we're working on trying to find people that will do some PTSD counseling virtually for, now that they've got food, now that they've got clothes, and they got medicine.
I think we're talking about future.
Yeah, now
after
we're
the
not
war.
even after the war, but for people in the refugee places, now that they've got that, let's see if we can find somebody who would be willing to do some pro bono work, because obviously they don't have any way of paying, and maybe where you could do like a Zoom meeting. I don't know what
Sure.
PTSD counseling looks like. I'm completely untrained in that area, but I know it's a real need, and I know there's people that do it, for the military. So that's one of the avenues that I'm looking at trying to facilitate here.
Katie and Andrew Green have been my guests. This has been it's been an honor to be able to learn from you and to hear God at work in the midst here. Obviously, the situation is something that's changing all the time. Thank you for for caring so much about the church in Ukraine, for sharing this with all of us, so that we know how to pray, how to give, and how to petition heaven, really, in this situation, but also giving glory to God in the midst of this. And again, whatever men intend for evil, God can and will and does use for good. We're seeing that now, and I expect we'll see that even more and all the more powerfully in the coming days, and especially on the other side of eternity. Check out Nikopol Evangelism and the Facebook page there, which I will link in the show notes here, and that is Nikopol Evangelism, just so that you can pray and give and keep up with all of the great stories and testimonies that are coming out of the middle of a war zone in Ukraine. Again, God is just that good, and you guys are awesome. Thank you, Andrew and Katie, for your time today.
Thank you, Rebecca.
We'll love to check back in with you as time allows. So thanks again.
Thank you
And
so much.
for everyone listening, and I pray you're motivated to not just hear with your ears, but also to act, to pray, and to give as you're being led. This is an area of need for sure. And brothers and sisters, we don't know the international boundaries. We're here as one body, here to serve for the kingdom. And this is a moment of international impact. So pray, give, check out Nikopol Evangelism on Facebook. And until next time, this is FaithWorks Live.